all used the time since yesterday productively to write a punchline to the title of the conference about Mani, Mithra, and the Buddha walking into a desert. What happens to them? I'm your chair for this morning's session, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Jenny Rose. Jenny Rose teaches Zoroastrian studies at Claremont Graduate University, which is one of the few places where Zoroastrian studies are taught in the world in general, and particularly in North America. She holds a doctorate in ancient Iranian studies from Columbia University, did her master's degree at SOAS with the late, great Mary Boyce, and has written extensively on the Zoroastrian religion, including two very accessible and clear introductory works, Zoroastrianism, an Introduction, and Zoroastrianism, A Guide for the Perplexed, and is about to complete another very interesting book project entitled Between Boston and Bombay, Cultural and Commercial Encounters of Yankees and Parsis, 1771 to 1865. And now we're going to hear from her on Wind and Fire, some shared motifs in Indo-Iranian and Sino-Iranian settings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Sanjot for inviting me to be here. I do appreciate the opportunity to attend conference such as this, partly because it's a time for us to engage in dialogue with colleagues from other fields and from other countries that we wouldn't otherwise get to meet together with. As a historian of religion who focuses particularly on the Zoroastrian tradition, I've come to recognize, probably fairly late in life, that I can't know everything that pertains to the lengthy history and the vast geographical span relating to the development of the religion. I'm particularly then reliant on colleagues in the field of art history and archaeology and those pesky Middle Iranian languages to draw upon their expertise and information to help me inch forward in my understanding of the religion. So I hope you'll excuse any treading on of toes today. I'm guessing that's what we're here for, a little bit. That desert's a busy place, isn't it? And I'm going to try and locate some Zoroastrians in those Silk Road wanderings. So my presentation this morning considers some of the recent archaeological and textual discoveries from regions to either side of that desert where Mithra, Buddha and Mani wandered. And those discoveries relate to material objects dating from the late Parthian to the late Sasanian, early Islamic period. And I want to begin by looking at one of those objects from the later part of that time frame as a case study to show how some of these finds further our knowledge of the beliefs and practices of Zoroastrians who spoke Eastern, Middle Iranian languages and who lived beyond the fluid boundaries of the imperial Iranian domain, the Iran Shah that Matthew was talking about yesterday. The visual vocabulary of such finds continues to challenge our notions of what constituted mainstream Zoroastrianism during that period. In fact, I would question the whole construct of Zoroastrianism from the get-go. But the finds speak of an intercultural interaction that affected Zoroastrian devotional focus and ritual, and also the artistic repertoire accompanying those facets of the religion. So I'm going to start with this recognizable ancient icon of the Zoroastrian religion, fire in a fire holder. It's a central motif in ancient Iranian text and ritual, and we know that reverence to fire in a fire holder is first depicted in the Iranian context on Achaemenid tomb reliefs at Naqsh-e-Rustam and at Persepolis, and on ancient Persian seals. It's on one Parthian rock relief and a Parthian coin. And then, of course, the fire in the fire holder appears regularly on the reverse of Sasanian coins. But the artifact on which this image is carved was not found in Iran, nor in an Eastern Iranian cultural setting in Central Asia. And Osmund gets the prize for recognizing that it's, in fact, from Central China. The fire motif appears twice on this house-shaped stone sarcophagus that was unearthed in late 2003 in modern Xi'an, to the northeast of the ancient capital of Chang'an. The tomb dates to the late 6th century of the Common Era. That's the end of the Northern Zhou period. And its carved and painted exterior reflects a mix of religious motifs. There are Manichaean, Buddhist, and Zoroastrian elements that, at first glance, suggest that the deceased, who was of Sogdian descent, was hedging his bets as to what was going to happen to him in the afterlife. So on either side of the door to the house tomb, which is flanked by two guardian deities, is a figure tending the fire, here and here, with tongs. And this is the photo that Matt showed us yesterday. He's wearing a really huge mouth cover, a padan, and this term paitidana appears in the Avesta as an item to be worn by priests. We have an iconographical association of the mouth cover with Mazda worshipping priests from the Achaemenid period onwards. And if you've got your wits about you at this time on a Sunday morning, you'll notice bits of him resemble a bird. And I'm not going to talk about that, the wings and the tail and the legs now, but Matthew showed us a version of this at Bamiyan. In the last 4 or 5 years, the earliest known version of this imagery has been found at a site in Khwarezmia, so I can talk about that later if that's of interest. So it's an Eastern Iranian motif. So apart from the fire ritual that's obviously happening here, this is a tray with offerings and tongs. There are several other elements on the tomb that point to a predominantly Zoroastrian religious context for the imagery, which is consistent with that on other Zoroastrian artifacts found in the Sogdian homeland. And I know that some of you are intimately familiar with this artifact, so I'm not going to deconstruct the whole thing, which will be a relief to you. But I did think I'd better provide some background for those who may not be familiar with the sarcophagus before I focus on one particular image. On the front of the sarcophagus, which is south-facing, is a Chinese Sogdian bilingual epitaph, which relates details about the deceased's family. The Sogdian section is longer than the Chinese. The family had originally come from the region of, in Chinese it's Shi, in Sogdian it's Kesh, that's the region near Shahrisabz in modern Uzbekistan. The Sogdian name of the deceased man is Wurkak. He has a wolfy element to his name, and in the Chinese version he's Shijun, Master Shi. And he had been a Sabao, a Sogdian community leader in one of the western prefectures before he moved to Chang'an, where he died at age 86 in 579 of the Common Era. Wurkak was buried with his wife, Wikusi, who in Chinese is Lady Kang or Nei Kang, and she had died a month after her husband and was buried in the sarcophagus with her. It was placed in a Chinese shaft tomb typical of the period. But despite the Chinese cultural context for the burial and some of the syncretistic aspects, I'm convinced that the most persuasive reading is that both Wurkak and his wife, at the end of his life at least, their lives at least, were Zoroastrian. And that the whole tomb could be said to function as a large ossuary, with the story of the deceased's life read clockwise, so from west, north, and then east, and culminating in the panels at the eastern end, which depict the soul's path to the afterlife. And you can see the lower right-hand section of this eastern panel shows a bridge with 2 dogs guarding the bridge, 2 priests here with those big kind of Central Asian padans carrying this hefty barsum, obviously performing some kind of ritual, as Wurkak and Wikusi, and apparently all their family and their pack animals and their herds are trotting over the bridge with them. The priests are probably saying the 4th day ceremony, the Charom ceremony, which is still performed in Zoroastrian contexts. In the Vendidad, the Videvdad, it is said that the soul lingers on the earth for 3 days, and then at dawn on the 4th day, it rises to be judged at the bridge. And the ceremony on the 4th day is to expedite that passage over the bridge. And that's, I don't know whether you can see that more clearly in the line drawing. So in the top right corner, so you have them passing over the bridge here, and then here you see this mountain range. In this corner, there they are, handing something to a lady with a crown. That it's a rolled up scroll of something. And she's winged. She has been interpreted as either the inner religious conscience, the Daina of deceased, or as Professors Gulashi and Bedoun suggest in a recent article, Dahma Afriti, the divinity of blessing, who's invoked in the ritual on the 4th morning. And I do have my own ideas about a Zoroastrian rather than Manichaean reading of these 2 characters here, but I don't want to go over my time, so I can talk about that later if you want to. So since the deceased, they've crossed the bridge, they've got to, the mountains was the top of High Hara was traditionally the place where was the stepping off point. And the document then can be assumed to be the account of the thoughts, words and deeds of the individuals, which has been accepted as being good. This is their passport to the next world, to their next stage. Videvdad 1930 tells how the Daina will come with her dogs, and that she will drag the vile souls of the Dregwants, those who follow the lie, into the darknesses, but she will rise with the souls of the Ashwans, the follower of order or right, into the place or presence of the Jātakas of the thought world, not so beyond the physical world, into the Mainyava world, the spirit world. The couple has entered the best existence that is referenced in the Gathas, the Vahishta Ahu, best existence. And the equivalent to this, of course, older Western term, appears in the Sogdian epitaph itself on the tomb, in reference to the paradise where the Sogdian merchant and his wife will have a new life together. Presiding over the next stage is a divinity within an aureola. His scarves are billowing around him as if they're animated, and that sense of kind of dynamism and animation is expanded by these 2 winged floaty figures that seem to be waving more billowing scarves over the top. He's sitting cross-legged atop 3 bulls. So he's enthroned on high in this kind of energized atmosphere. The figure holds a trident in his right hand, and his left hand is on his waist. So he's just 2-armed there. So, of course, some of these details, the trident held upright and the sitting on the bull, are also associated with the Indic divinity Shiva, Mahadeva, Maheshwara, who also often has 3 heads. This one only has 1 here. The Rig Vedic epithet Shiva, meaning auspicious, was initially connected with the Vedic deity Rudra, who also has the title of Pashupati, the lord of cattle or animals, that is, the lord of all living beings. And the divinized Shiva also is recognized as Pashupati. And in that role, he becomes then associated with another Vedic divinity, Vayu, the energy and movement of air, the breath that gives life. Given this context, this can't be the Indic, I don't think, the Indic Shiva or Indic Vayu, but must be the Iranian good Vayu, which is also associated in the Avesta with the breath of life. Etienne de la Vessière acknowledges that this image is the Sogdian form of Vayu, but proposes that since in Zoroastrian textual context, Vayu doesn't act as a judge, the figure must present, or perhaps presents, an iconographic assimilation with the righteous judge of the Manichaean scheme, who is enthroned in the atmosphere. But the couple have already been judged. They're already above the mountains. And this must then, I think, be the Zoroastrian good Vayu, who in the Middle Persian text takes the soul of the Ashuan by the hand after it has crossed the paths of selection on the summit of Mount Harbors and brings it to its rightful place in the upper atmosphere. There is an Avestan text, the Hadochtnask, that anticipates this transport by good Vayu into the best existence. And it reads that as the soul, the Urvan, which is the life breath, the breath soul, of the orderly person, the Ashuan, leaves the world of the living at dawn on the fourth day after death, a wind seems to blow towards it from the south that is more fragrant than any other wind. So here then is a Sogdian Zoroastrian representation of Vayu, his scarf fluttering in the fragrant breeze, welcoming the souls of a Sogdian Zoroastrian couple who'd lived and died in China in the 6th century. So there have been lots of arguments put forward as to why it's not Ahura Mazda in that position. And I don't want to go into all of them, but one is that for the Sogdians he was less central than Vayu. It's kind of displaced by Vayu. But we do know that Sogdian ossuaries from the homeland also... Oh, sorry, I should have shown you this. Gives everything a lot clearer, sorry. So I just leave you a second to gaze upon it. You can see there his two arms. Okay, I can come back to it. So we have, this was discovered in 2012. You have Sogdian ossuaries that represent a plethora of divine beings and exclude Ahura Mazda altogether. And it's thought this is the ossuary assembled from bits near Termez in Sorry? In near Shakri Sabs. Yes, Shakri Sabs. Yes. This is the bit that we're interested in, because this represents the soul is weighed there, but arrives in this kind of house of song. We have a harp that will perhaps interest the musicians amongst us. I suggest, as do others, that this is Vohumana. Franz Grenet thinks it's possibly Ashavahishta. And there's my thinking that it could be Vohumana was based on the continuing text on that. The Veda 19 is quite important in this respect. That after Dana has brought the soul above Mount Hara, up rises Vohumana from his golden throne and says, "When did you come hither, O Ashuan, from the decaying existence to the undecaying existence?" And it continues, "Thus welcomed, the souls of the Ashuans go forth to the golden thrones of Ahura Mazda, of the Amashaspentas, to the house of song, the abode of Ahura Mazda, the abode of the Amashaspentas, the abode of the other Ashuans." So there are lots of people sitting on, lots of spiritual divine beings sitting on golden thrones to welcome the Ashuan. In the 3rd century Common Era inscription of Kerdir, the chief priest at Sarmashad, he talks about wanting to know what heaven and hell is like, and is it his vision? Does he send someone else who comes back and describes what he's seen? But we do know that there is this description of the likeness of Kerdir being welcomed into the, crossing the bridge and then being welcomed by different people with different thrones. And the last throne, the throne of radiance, is that of he's welcomed into the radiance of Vahram, Verithragna. So back to our representations of Vayu. This is in the Sogdian homeland, similar to the representation on the tomb in China. Obviously, these images were part of the artistic vocabulary in the Sogdian homeland as well. On this mural from Panjkent, the character has 3 faces and multiple arms, one of which holds a trident and the other one holds a mace. And I'm not, perhaps someone else can enlighten me as to what else is being held there. It's a sword? A spoon? A spoon. Oh, that's a spoon, not a mace? Oh, interesting. Thank you. And of course, he's seated on a bull here. I couldn't get a clear photo of that. Well, even though I was there. So this mural from another private house in. I'm going on. This mural from another private house in Panjkent carries the actual label, not of Shiva, but Bopearachchi. And Bopearachchi derives from the nominative of Western form of Vayu, Vayush, and another, it's again from Vedanta 19. The phrase reads Vayushuparo the wind, Vayu, whose activity is in the upper regions. The 3 faces that we perhaps now associate with the Indic Shiva, Mahadeva, is equated in a Sogdian Buddhist text, the Vesantara Jātaka, with the 3-faced Bopearachchi. So there's a direct correlation made in this Sogdian environment. And this horn that the 3rd face is blowing, again, Grenet indicates is a sign of the kind of atmospheric activity, the wind blowing. So many consider the Sogdian iconography of Bopearachchi to imitate that of Shiva Mahadeva, and to be based on an earlier Indian iconographic type. But the earliest examples of imagery of Vayu or Wesh with these purported Shiva attributes is on the coins from the Kushan Empire. And Kushan coins from the times of the 4th Kushan ruler, Kanishka I, from his 2nd gold issue coins onwards, provides the earliest identifiable named anthropomorphic representations of Zoroastrian Jātakas, those beings worthy of worship. And one type seems to provide the key to the depiction, or elements of the depiction of good Vayu, Bopearachchi, on the Sogdian murals from Panjkent and the sarcophagus from Śyāmaand. And even though, perhaps because Osmund is in the room, I'm going to venture into the world of numismatics just briefly. Well, you know, I have to fight for my Zoroastrians. So the Bactrian form Weishu is again an Eastern Middle Iranian form that comes from the Old Iranian Wayush. He's portrayed on these coins always standing, with 2, 4, and sometimes even 6 arms. One holds a trident. Sometimes he's got 1 head and a nimbus there. Sometimes he's got 3 heads, sometimes in front of a bull. But there's the trident and there's the trident. So various articles recently by Joe Cribb and more recently by Doris Srinivasan contend that some of these elements, the nimbus, the trident, the hand drum or the thunderbolt, the water pot or vase, and the animal skin, which were standardized markers of Shiva in Gandharan representations, are all elements that first appear attached to Weishu on Kushan coins. I'm going to move away from that battlefield. And then the Kushan dynasty that flourished from the 1st to mid-3rd century extended, of course, from Gandhara and Bactria up into what is now southern Sogdiana, which is now Uzbekistan. And the Kushan coins, of course, that developed during that period are of an intercultural style that incorporates evolving Iranian, Indian, and Indian iconographic forms, along with a remnant Greek style that seems to have survived since the time of Alexander. The ensuing syncretism that we saw on that earlier coin is also found on the inscription of Kanishka at Rabatak near Surkhotal, which is in northern Afghanistan. So the Bactrian inscription, written in a non-cursive Greek script, was translated by Nicholas Sims Williams and Joe Cribb in 1995, and then reread by Sims Williams in 2003. And this rereading is really important because we see new things each time. So the inscription is of historical and religious importance in documenting the first year of Kanishka I's reign. It names several divinities as the source of Kanishka's authority to rule. Sanjot showed the text yesterday and read that Nana was one of the authorities, and then she very cleverly left out. I don't know whether it was deliberate or not, but the other gods who are named, who are, yes, 30 minutes, who are, sorry, I'm in danger of going over, but so the next divinities who are named as authorizing Kanishka's right to rule are all Iranian, they're not all, but most of them are Iranian Zoroastrian divine beings, but the next ones in the sequence are. So it's Ahura Mazda, Srausha, Naryo Sangha, and Mithra, and then there's this kind of bizarre character called Majduanu, who means gracious, who this could be connected, does the epithet good with Waisha, or it could be connected with the auspiciousness of Shiva. And then the last one in the list is Umma. It's obviously a mother goddess, possibly Indian Umma. But the divinities that dominate that text after Nana, is she Anahita, is she Spenta Armaiti? We don't know. But the divinities after that are Zoroastrian, and that indicates an original, perhaps root religion for the Kushans, dare I say an official religion at this time, as an Eastern Iranian form of Zoroastrianism. And that notion, I think, is supported by the numerous Zoroastrian Jātakas that are depicted on the reverse of Kushan coins, and also later in the Bactrian calendar, which has Zoroastrian month and day names. So one gold coin type, beginning with Kanishka's father, Wima Kadphises, in the early 2nd century, shows flames resting on the ruler's right shoulder. This motif, like the nimbus, is generally interpreted as a stylized representation of the ancient Western Iranian concept of khwarna, the glory that radiates from a ruler who is authorized by Ahura Mazda. That luminous glory also belongs to Ahura Mazda, the Amasya Spentas and Jātakas, so it's like a reflection of that glory. And they, of course, are those who sit on the golden thrones. And the reverse of Kanishka's coins depict named Zoroastrian Jātakas, often, not always, but who have individual characteristics, and often proffer the diadem of rule, representing the endowment of the khwarna, the far. This is an Iranian motif. So here you have the depiction of the Yazata Atar. In Bactrian, he is Athsho, fire, shown as a man with flames coming from both shoulders. The older Western liturgy, the Yasna Haptang Haiti, identifies Atar, fire, as the means for worshippers to approach Ahura Mazda. In the Gathas, Atar is emblematic of the order that's established in the cosmos by Ahura Mazda, which is upheld by humans who ally with good thought. The flames, as also the nimbus representing the Khwana, reflect the beneficent activity and the mighty gleaming glory of Ahura Mazda and the Jātakas. And we know that Iranian rulers from Darius I on claim to epitomize an alliance with order or right that emulates and promotes the excellent creative work. The Old Persian word is frasha, which in the Avesta means a kind of renewing of Ahura Mazda. So the two sides of each coin may be understood to show the Kushan concept of that rule of order. On the obverse, the king makes an offering to the fire in a fire holder, paying homage to the divine beings who, on the reverse, are seen to sanction and support his kingship. The fire holder and act of offering on the Kushan coins are similar to that on this contemporary Parthian rock relief at Bizertun. It's just around the corner from the great relief of Darius. A king who's wearing a diadem, we think he's a king, not a priest, because he's wearing a diadem with ribbons, is scooping something out of this bowl and making an offering to the fire in a fire holder. And although the fire holder appears in some form on the reverse of most Sasanian gold and silver coins, signifying this link between the rule of order and religious adherence, and kings in later Sasanian plates and rock reliefs are surrounded by the nimbus, the halo. Only one Sasanian king, as far as we know, copied the Kushan depiction of the Khwana as the flame on the shoulder. This is Valkash in the late 5th century. On a few late issue coins of Kanishka, representations of the Buddha on the reverse appear, perhaps indicating the king's personal adoption of Buddhism at this time. No, we don't think so. Maybe the royal approval of temples, though. This image depicts the historical Buddha entirely surrounded by the nimbuses expanded to enclose the whole figure. So it's like it's like as a mark of spiritual endowment, and it's under this during this Kushan period that the earliest anthropomorphic representations of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas developed to become the focus of devotional practice for Buddhists. Nearly there. Am I okay for time? So the flaming shoulder motif of the radiance emanating from an awakened individual became part of Kushan Buddhist iconic vocabulary, as noted by Sanjot yesterday. An example of this is on a now lost schist sculpture of the Dīpaā೯ƒkara Buddha, the Buddha of the past, from Shatorak near Begram. The upper relief also seems to be edged with a mandala of flames. Similar sculpture, we know, adorned the Kushan Buddhist temples and monasteries established around Begram, and variant representations of the Buddha have also been found in reliefs and wall paintings in Kushan temples at the northern edges of the empire in what is now southern Uzbekistan, including that Termez region where you have the monastery and stupa of Fayaz Tepe. And I think that it's probably that it's around these sites that meetings took place between local Zoroastrians and Buddhists. These perhaps were centers of religious and cultural diversity, and that may be evidenced by a discovery on the wall of the nearby monastic settlement of Kara Tepe, where there's a monochrome mural, and I'm sorry that this is all I have. I don't know whether anybody's got a decent photo of that. And this was, it's a meditating Buddha surrounded by two halos of flames. And the Russian archaeologist Boris Stavisky considered this to be a syncretic combination of the image of the Buddha with the attributes of the god of light or fire. And he read this Bactrian graffiti up here as Bodo Mozdo, Buddha Mazda, which seemed to confirm his analysis. According to this reading, the fusion of the symbolism of the glory of Ahura Mazda with the image of the Buddha could denote either a Zoroastrian modification of Buddhist iconography or the Buddhist assimilation of Ahura Mazda with as an attendant local deity. The compound name, Buddha Mazda, also brings to mind the reference in the later Khotanese Saka book of Zambasta, it must be after the 7th century, to Maitreya as Buddha Urmaized. Someone mentioned, I think it was Victor, said, why haven't we talked about the Khotanese Saka as a point of reference? Well, here we are. So the old Khotanese nominative form, Urmaized, comes from an older Iranian Ahura Mazdan, belonging to Ahura Mazda. And in this, not here, but in the Khotanese Buddhist context, Urmaizdan, or in its nominative form, Urmaized, refers to the sun in the sky, the greatest observable fire, that then becomes linked with the Maitreya Buddha. But the graffiti may also be the personal name of the individual who added it. Nicholas Sims-Williams notes that although Mosdo is found as a personal name in Bactrian, there's no example of it occurring in compound names. These all use Oromazdo. So he suggests that the Mosdo may derive from Mijda, reward, and that the name should then be read as reward bestowed by the Buddha. And one assumes from this graffiti that the reward that is bestowed is enlightenment. The flaming shoulder motif of Kushan dynastic iconography seems to have travelled with Buddhist monks and pilgrims from Central Asia eastwards along the trade routes to China. It recurs in depictions of the divine radiance emanating from the Buddha, as here at the eastern edge of that desert. You've got this is from the Getty reconstruction of the caves, and that flame on the shoulder motif is now kind of expanded and beautified, and there's this multi-layered flaming mandala around. To the left of this image, last shot, is a little depiction of Shiva, as Maheshwara. And this is cribbed directly from Doris Srinivasan's paper in the Electronic Journal of Vedic Studies. But she points out that he's wearing a crown, and that in the crown is an image holding a wind bag. And it's a unique image. It's not Weisho, but it's very like the Wado image on the Kushan coin that Matt showed yesterday. And Srinivasan suggests that this cave painting could actually have been made by Central Asians. So not only do you have this continued connectivity of Maheshwara with the wind as the breath of life, but you also have, if it is painted by Central Asians, this recognition of a kind of equivalency between their own understanding of Weisho and the Hindu/Buddhist understanding of Shiva. So I belted across China, Sogdiana, back to Gandhara, Iran, and back to Dunhuang, and I've sought to highlight the interplay of a couple of elemental iconographic motifs that were stimulated by Western concepts. The wind, who acts in the upper regions, and the radiance of fire as an emblem of spiritual endowment and a means of access to the realm of Ahura Mazda. And these two elemental motifs, in turn, seem to have impacted some of the dynamic art forms that took root in non-Zoroastrian religious contexts and spread to non-Iranian cultures. Thank you.
Just introduce our next speaker, Osmund Bopearachchi, who, as we all know by now, I think is a numismatist, specializing in Indo-Greek and Greco-Bactrian coinage, and more broadly as well. He's the emeritus director of the CNRS in France, one of France's major research institutions, and is currently adjunct professor of Central and South Asian art, archaeology, and numismatics here at UC Berkeley, and is the author of a number of monographs on the coins of this area. So please, we're excited to have you.
Thank you, Sanjot, for inviting me. So my today's talk is based on a hitherto unpublished toilet tray, presumably found in Begram in Afghanistan, depicting a syncretic image of Greek Helios and Indian Surya. In the light of the iconography of this toilet tray, I also wish to re-examine two other toilet trays, the iconography of which misinterpreted by the art historian who published them. These three documents represent the fusion of Indian Surya with Greek Helios. According to the classical mythology, Helios was a titan and not an Olympian god, and did not play a vital role in Greek mythology, yet he is depicted in many forms of Greek art as early as the 6th century BCE. Helios, the sun god, was an indefatigable charioteer, originally drawn by bulls and only later by fire-darting steeds. Helios, son of Hyperion and Theia, was the personification of the sun, and his sisters were the goddess Selene, the moon, and Eos, the dawn. The battle fought between the giants and the Olympian gods for the supremacy of the cosmos, depicted in the Pergamon altar. Helios rises from the ocean, driving his quadriga, the chariot driven by 4 horses, and enters the battle armed with a torch, targeting a giant standing in his way. With her back to the viewer, the moon goddess, Selene, rides on her mule over a giant. Eos, the goddess of dawn, rides the side saddle into the battle. Among many depictions of the Greek Helios in Central Asia and in Gandhara, we may cite a few examples directly relevant to our study. Helios with a radiate head, standing in a quadriga, facing holding spear, or moving to right, appears without any Indian inspiration on the coins issued by Plato, a Bactrian king of Central Asia, who reigned around the 2nd century BCE. The Indo-Scythian, that's for Victor, the founder of the Scythian kingdom in Gandhara in the 1st century BCE, depicts Helios in a biga, chariot with 2 horses on this coin. Telephus, an Indo-Greek king, contemporary of Indo-Scythian Maoris, who reigned in Gandhara between 75 and 70 BCE, is, in one of his silver issues, depicts the radiate Helios standing, holding a scepter, accompanied by his sister Selene, standing adorned with a crescent moon. The assimilation of Selene into the imagery of the sun god at this moment of the history is an important feature. Kanishka, we saw with the coins, Kanishka, the greatest of all the Kushan kings, among many Greek and Iranian gods, depicts on his coins Selene, the moon goddess, claimed by the Greek legend written as Selene, and the iconography, very particularly the crescent moon emerging from the shoulders. The Iranian version of the goddess with the same iconography, identical, declares in Bactrian script that she is Mao. However, in both iconographies, the goddess is shown as a man. On another series of the same king, Helios is depicted with a Greek legend. He stands facing head to left, surrounded by a radiate halo, and clasping the hilt of the sword with the left hand. The same god, with an identical iconography, appears on another series with the Bactrian legend, referring to him as Miro or sometimes as Miro, with Mithra, meaning Mithra, the ancient Iranian solar deity. The assimilation of Helios with Mithra takes place during the reign of Kanishka, whom I propose to date between 127 and 150 CE. Prior to Kanishka, two Indo-Greek kings make a discreet allusion to Mithra by associating him with Greek god Zeus. On his bronze series, the Indo-Greek Amintas depict Zeus with a Phrygian cap and a radiate solar numbers, two symbols of Mithra. His contemporary, Hermias, also depicts a similar type of syncretic divinity on his unique bronze series. The same king takes one step forward, showing Zeus with the radiate Phrygian cap of Mithra on his silver coins. Almost during the same period, Mithraism, an Eastern variant of the sun worship, became quite popular among the Romans. The Mithraism reached the apogee of its popularity during the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Mithra, wearing a Phrygian cap and Parthian-like costume, killing the bull, was very popular during this period. Sol Invictus, invisible sun, played a prominent role in the Mithraic mysteries and was equated with Mithra. Under the Severians, this Eastern variant of Sol was given a much more prominent place in the state religion. On the obverse of the coins of Roman Emperor Probus 276 to 282 CE, his portrait is characterized by a radiate bust wearing a consular robe and holding an eagle-tipped scepter in his right hand. The reverse depicts Sol, sun, in a quadriga moving to left. The legend Soli Invicto, meaning the invisible sun. The legend on both sides read, from both in Latin, our supreme commander and emperor Probus, the dutiful and wise Augustus, who has the protection of the invisible sun. As we shall see later, the Mithraism had an impact on Central Asian paintings. Having examined very briefly the evolution of the Greek sun god Helios and the Iranian Mithra, let us examine the origin and development of Surya, the sun god, in Indian iconography. The oldest so far known depiction of Indian Surya or Aditya is engraved on the stone railing that once enclosed the Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya in Bihar. Surya stands frontally, riding a chariot driven by 4 horses, harnessed as pair, running in opposite directions. The chhatra, the parasol or the umbrella, above the head and the halo with the sun rays place him in a solar context. 2 figures on either side of the god shoot arrows with their bows at demons of darkness depicted on either side of the chariot. They are known as the light goddesses and sometimes explicitly named as Ushas and Pratyushas when present as a pair. They represent the darkness dispelling function of the sun with the arrow they shoot representing the rays of light. The spectacular relief at Baja Vihara near Pune in the Western Ghats is also directly relevant to our study. Surya rides a chariot between 2 wives. The chariot tramples the monstrous body of the demon, symbolizing the night. Both reliefs portray the sun divinity driving away the darkness. Ananda Kumaraswamy identified the royal personage riding on an elephant which is striding over broad landscape, holding aloft in his trunk an uprooted tree. Although Robert Di Caroli agrees with Kumaraswamy's identification, admits that, I quote, this assessment is impossible to prove conclusively, end of quotation. However, in a forthcoming article, Laurent Bausch, quoting from Rigveda, argues that Indra is implored literally to uncover what is covered. And his greatest triumphs includes striking Mithra, the chief of the demon of drought, to release light of Surya and breaking the mountain to free the cows. These images dating back to the Sunga period are among the earliest representations of Surya found in South Asia. However, both belong to a period when the iconography of the Indian sun god was not yet codified according to, I missed this one, sorry. The image of dating back to the Sunga period and are among the earliest representations of Surya in South Asia. However, both belong to a period when the iconography of the sun god was not yet codified according to the narratives in the sacred texts in the Rig Veda. One of the earliest relief sculptures depicting Surya is in a well-codified context is the one on the eastern porch ceiling of the Virupaksha temple in Patadakal in Karnataka. The temple is an early Chalukyan creation and was built by Queen Lokamahadevi. The sun deity is represented standing erect, holding a lotus blossom in each hand of his raised hands. He wears a torque, a necklace, tied to the neck, heavy earrings, and a tiara. His head is encircled with a radiant halo, reminding us of the narration in the Rig Veda. At his feet is depicted his half-brother, charioteer Aruna, driving the seven-horse chariot, holding reins of the horse. The seven horses are depicted, 3 on either side, running in opposite directions, while the seventh one in the middle facing us. On either side of the sun god are the female archers, Usha and Pratyusha, driving off the darkness. One arrow shot by the archer to the left of the sun god has pierced belly of the demon, fleeing behind the demon archer, shooting an arrow at the right-hand corner. Below the demon archer, another demon fights back with a sword in the left hand and a shield in the right, already pierced by an arrow. 4 kinnaras, half bird, half human, 2 on either side, 6 vidyadharas, 3 on either side, either dance or play music with a veena and percussion instruments like some cymbals and drums. At the lowest register, Dandin with a palm leaf manuscript and Pingala to write are depicted. Having discussed to a certain extent the basic iconographic characteristic of Greek Helios, Iranian Mithra, and Indian Surya, let us now examine the 3 toilet trays. The iconographies of these toilet trays represent the diversity and syncretism characterizing the cultural, religious, and artistic heritage of the former political supremacies in Greater Gandhara, Persians, Greeks, Scythians, and Parthians. The first toilet tray was published by my good friend Katsumi Tanabe, identifying the deity as Artemis without justifying his hypothesis. As all of us know, Artemis in ancient Greek mythology is a goddess of the hunt, wild animals, and chastity. The divinity with a radiating halo standing frontally is first of all a male figure. He holds most probably a thunderbolt. As we have seen on the coins of Indo-Scythian Maoris, instead of Surya, Surya's half-brother Aruna, a female charioteer, standing next to the god, holds the rein of the 4 horses hitched to the chariot. The woman to god's right holds a spear in a upraised left hand, while the other female figure on the opposite side wields a thunderbolt. Although demons are not explicitly depicted, in the light of the Indian counterparts that we have discussed so far, we can suggest that they are Ushas and Pratyushas driving off the darkness. The iconography of the first toilet tray could be better understood in the light of the hitherto unpublished document. The sun god, standing frontally, adorned with the solar numbers, hold a scepter with the Makarajwaja. To his right, a woman charioteer holds the reins of the horses. To the left of the sun god, a woman dressed in a Greek garb and wearing a Greek helmet attacks the demons of darkness with a thunderbolt while protecting herself with a shield. Her attitude immediately reminds us of Athena Alcidamus, the goddess of Pella, where Alexander the Great was born, depicted on the coins of many Indo-Greek kings, very particularly of Menander I, the greatest of all the Indo-Greek kings who ruled over India and territories south of the Hindu Kush mountains. The woman warrior on the toilet tray wears a similar helmet and holds an analogous thunderbolt and a shield, most probably decorated with the aegis that of Athena, composed of the head of Medusa. Woman to our proper left holds bow and arrow. The horses advance in the sky, trampling the grotesque bodies of demons symbolizing the night. The iconography of this toilet tray, which we date either to the 2nd or the 1st century BCE, is also characterized by the syncretism of two cultures, one Indian, the other Hellenistic. It is Indian because the demons of darkness and the woman charging the demons with bow and arrow. On the other side, on the other hand, the iconography is partly Hellenistic because of Helios, the quadriga, and the helmeted woman with the shield and thunderbolt recalling Athena. The third toilet tray, now in the Hirayama Ikuo Museum of Art, was published once again by Katsumi Tanabe with a simple caption, believe me, dish biga, that's it. More than a simple biga, chariot driven by two horses, this is another theatrical depiction of synchronized version of Greek Helios associated with Indian Surya. The sun god stands frontally, holds a scepter in the lowered left hand and a thunderbolt in the raised right hand. The winged female charioteer stands God's left, holds the reins of the two horses. The woman archer, holding several arrows, draws one towards the monster emerging from the right. Her companion to our left attacks the monster, yielding a long spear from the raised right hand while protecting herself with a shield. Although dressed in Greek clothes, these two female figures represent Usha and Pratyusha driving off the darkness. The demons are here quite dramatically. The one to our right, covering his face with a shield, fights back with a danda, a club. The bearded demon to our left fights with the battle axe against the helmeted deity, who in turn attempts to attack him with a long spear. For the Indo-Greek sculptor of this toilet tray, the fight between the wives of Surya and the demons of darkness is a real conflict between the forces of good and evil. It is interesting to note how an Indian story was interpreted through the eyes of a Greek artist. Let us now examine how this synchronized iconography of Greek Helios and Indian Surya traveled from Gandhara to Bamiyan and beyond along the Silk Roads. Many art historians have discussed the symbolism of the sun god standing in a chariot pulled through the sky by white horses painted in the niche located directly over the 38-meter Buddha. Before that, I wish to draw your attention to the depictions of sun and moon gods of the cave M and K at Bamiyan. The mural painting of the cave M, the winged and helmeted sun god to our right, holding a trident, stands frontally in a chariot driven by horses. To our left, the moon god stands frontally in a chariot pulled by hamsas or wild geese. Although the painting is badly damaged, in the cave K, two gods are depicted above the parinirvana, passing away of the Buddha, scene. The sun god to our left is in a chariot driven by two horses, and the moon god to our right is in a chariot pulled by two wild geese. Each god is accompanied by two attendants. It is important to remember that the sun and moon gods do not appear as a pair on the early Indian depictions. The first pair is depicted on the coins of Indo-Greek telephers. Iwai and Miyaji point out that the sun and moon gods on the murals of Bamiyan were inspired by Gupta and post-Gupta, dated usually to the 5th century CE. Shumpei Iwai, in a recent article, argues, based on C14 analysis and stylistic analysis, the Buddhist mural paintings of Cave M and J in Bamiyan, considered by some art historians as a production of the 8th century, should be dated to the 6th and 7th centuries. Tianshu Su pointed out that in standard iconography, such as Womb Mandala or Garbhakosha Dhatu of Vairochana, the sun god is in a chariot driven by horses, and the moon god is in a chariot pulled by the geese. She has given many examples of this composition in the cave paintings of Kizil and Dunhuang. Without discussing all of them, lack of time, let me mention the most important ones. In cave 171 in Kizil, the central stripe of the vaulted ceiling, the sun god is paired with the moon god. The moon god image is almost identical to that of sun god. The major difference is the color of their radiation. The solar disk is shown in red color, while the moon is in white. The axis of the ceiling, cave number 38 at Kizil, depicting the performances of the Kucha musicians, a series of celestial motifs in which a sun disk with 4 flying geese and crescent moon ringed by 16 small dots and surrounded by 4 flying white geese are depicted. The depiction of a sun and moon god on either side of the main figure also made its appearance in Dunhuang. We saw a photograph a while ago. One such early image is the Dunhuang Cave 285. A horse chariot riding sun god and a bird chariot riding moon god frame the top of the shrine on either side. They strongly recall the Bamiyan paintings. This cave number 285 was constructed between 538 and 539 as evidenced by a precisely dated inscription found inside the cave. The depiction of sun god closest to the one from the cave number 285 of the Mogao cave at Dunhuang comes from Gandhara. On this Corinthian capital, sun god, more like Indian in the attire, stands in the middle of the two-wheeled chariot holding a scepter or a torch. The two women dressed in Greek attire driving the chariot could be his two wives, Usha and Pratyusha, representing the dawn. The horses are harnessed as pair, running in opposite directions like on the Dunhuang painting. But only difference is in Gandhara, the demons of darkness are represented, which is not the case in Dunhuang. Contrary to Gandharan, Indian, and Dunhuang prototypes, the sun god at Kizil is depicted wearing armor and crossed ankle on a chariot. In Kizil Cave 17, the presence of sun god's chariot is indicated by two horses splayed out at two sides. Akira Miyaji concluded in one of his recent essays that the art of Bamiyan developed on the basis of local Buddhist beliefs during the 6th and 7th centuries in relation with Kucha and Dunhuang. Although the art of Bamiyan may have continued up to the 8th and 9th centuries, the association with Kucha and Dunhuang seems to have ceased by this time. Various attempts were made, we heard this yesterday with Matthew's talk, to define the symbolism of sun god standing in a chariot pulled through the sky by the white horses, painted in the niche located directly over the 38-meter Buddha. Benjamin Rowland, while accepting the association of the sun god with the solar symbolism of the Buddha, insisted upon the Sasanian Mithraic nature of the image. Franz Groné added arguments based on Miryasht, the hymn to Mithra, of the Avesta. It is true that it is our master himself who requests the Mithra to be worshipped and prayed to as much as he, our master himself. Let us examine the iconography of this image in the light of the documents discussed so far in this paper. The sun god is clad in heavy, smooth tunic shaped like a coat, which falls below the knees with a sword attached to the belt. Although not visible on the painting, he should wear trousers under the long tunic. This type of garb was usually worn by Sasanian monarchs with variations. A large halo with a saw-teeth motif surrounding the whole body of the god also has some reminiscence of Mithraic imagery. The four white horses, some see as two. I'm taking the line drawing proposed by Deborah Klimberg-Salter of the chariot, are assimilated with Mithra. There are several allusions to these horses in Miryasht. The long spear held by the sun god is also mentioned in the same sacred text. Another distinguished characteristic is the corrugated ribbons floating upwards. I have discussed elsewhere in the light of the gilded bronze pectoral collar necklace depicting the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas found presumably in the Salt Range, along with the coins of Mihirkula, the role played by the fluttering streamers with parallel ridges in Indian iconography. The most remarkable feature of the iconography of the pectoral in these fluttering is these fluttering streamers emanating behind the heads of the Bodhisattvas and also hanging from the chhatra above the head. Although the fluttering ribbons appear for the first time on the coins of Huishka, the successors of Kushans, popularized it because they believed that the diadem of kinship was divinely conferred, thus consecrating each monarch's rule. The relief at Taktibostan that we saw yesterday, depicting the crowning ceremony of Shapur II in the presence of Mithra, is a good example. One cannot deny the Sasanian inspiration on the main figure and the probable identification with Iranian Mithra. Let us examine the rest of the iconography. At the upper section of the painting, two wind deities with their hair twisted upwards emerge from the clouds holding a scarf blown by the wind. They are female deities as indicated by the large breasts. Although the winged deities are known in Greco-Roman art, the closest parallel to the ones at Bamiyan come from the Kushan context. We saw this in both papers yesterday and today. The winged god Ovado on the Kushan coins may have inspired largely the iconography of the Bamiyan and Chinese murals. Both gold and bronze coins issued by Kanishka I depict the wind god with upraised hair holding blowing cape. He blows air from the half-open mouth. Ovado or Vata is no doubt of Iranian origin. However, the Gandharan artists depict such winged gods in a Buddhist context. The sculpture from the State Museum in Berlin is one of them. The association of wind deity with Mithra is once again mentioned in Miryasht. Let us examine the iconography of the two kinnaras, half human and half bird beings, depicted on either side of the painting. Since this section of the painting is much damaged, many details cannot be seen. However, Benjamin Rowland denying any Indian origin and describes them as Iranian versions of kinnaras with a beard and a round cap. The kinnara to our left, according to Roland, holds a torch. The bad state of preservation of this painting does not enable us to confirm or discard Roland's observation. I personally think they hold musical instruments. We have discussed the symbolism of the relief depicting Surya on the eastern porch ceiling of Virupaksha temple in Patadakal, which is contemporary to the Bamiyan mural painting. As 4 kinnaras of the Virupaksha temple relief, the 2 kinnaras of the Bamiyan painting may also play music to celebrate the victory of the light over darkness. The Indian inspiration on the Bamiyan mural painting of the sun god thus cannot be denied. Benjamin Roland pushed his hypothesis of sole Iranian influence over the Bamiyan sun god by rejecting to recognize the 2 winged figures on either side of the sun god as Usha and Pratyusha, arguing that in an Indian context, both would have had identical bow and arrow. First of all, it is noteworthy in Bhaja, the 2 wives of the sun god are not at all armed. The female deity to our right most probably holds an arrow, if not a spear. The deity to our left definitely holds a shield adorned with a face that Franz Grone identified as that of Medusa or Gorgon. Both Benjamin Roland and Franz Grone were correct to recognize the deity in the guise of Athena. The iconography of the unpublished toilet tray is one of the precursors of the Bamiyan iconography. The iconographies of 3 toilet trays that we have discussed thus enables us to elucidate the misinterpretation created by art historians. He is certainly a sun god in the guise of Mithra as described in Mirage, yet the whole imagery has Indian elements reinterpreted in a cross-cultural context. It is this type of syncretic image that travel along the Silk Road. As far as I am concerned, the Bamiyan sun god in the guise of Mithra is Buddha himself. The fact that the mural painting stands in the niche located directly over the 38-meter Buddha is a way to symbolize the solar presence of the Buddha himself. All the early depictions of sun god in India, Central Asia, and China occur in a Buddhist context. I agree with Laurent Bausch in admitting the Surya relief in the railing of the Mahabodhi temple and in a cave in Bhaja Vihara are a celebration of Buddha's momentous achievement to dispel the darkness of night and restore his human consciousness to the manifest dimension. Gautam, which means one who has the most light, identifies the Vedic lineage of the family of Aditya or the Aditya, the sun. In the Buddhist literature, the Buddha Gautama is compared to sun and light symbolism. To give just one example, upon predicting that the infant Siddhartha would become a Buddha, the sage Asita utters the following verses. I quote, "From quitting his realm, detached from pleasures, realizing the truth, through arduous efforts, this son of knowledge will blaze forth in this world to dispel the darkness of delusion." End of quote. When the sun god traveled along the Silk Road, the identity between the Buddha with the great sun was very explicit in Tantric Buddhist traditions because the supreme Tathagata Vairochana was reckoned as the solar source from which all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas shine forth as rays of light. In conclusion, let me emphasize, although the Greek Helios, the Iranian Mithra, and Indian Surya originated from different faraway geographical zones, as they travel in space and time along the Silk Roads to Buddhist centers in distant lands, they developed in cross-fertilized contexts, ingeniously incorporating the sentiments, aesthetics, and philosophies of their respective populations, creating new forms of art. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to introduce our final speaker of this morning's session, Jessie Pons. Jessie is Junior Professor for South Asian History of Religion in the Center for Religious Studies at the Ruhr-University Bochum in Germany, where she focuses on Buddhist art in Gandhara, various sites of the Silk Road and the Indian subcontinent. And she's also preparing a monograph on Buddhist sculptures of Gandhara in the 1st to 4th century CE.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you, Sanjot, for inviting me, and thank you, Osmund, for probably whispering the idea into her ear. And thank you, Frank, for the wonderful organization. It's a pleasure to be here. So this paper will examine two previous birth stories, as the title indicates, in the hagiography of Buddha Shakyamuni, namely the story of Śyāmaand, the young ascetic who took care of his blind parents, was shot by a king on a hunting trip until he was revived by an act of truth uttered by his parents, and that of the brahmacharin Mithra, whose future enlightenment was prophesied by the Buddha of the past, Dīpaā≠ԥkara. And the data I will present draws upon two collaborative research projects I've been involved in. The first one, which is completed, is Dynamics of Text, Corpora, and Image Programs, representations of Buddhist narratives along the Silk Road, which brought together Christoph Andel, a sinologist with a focus on Chinese Buddhism, and me, an art historian focusing on Gandhara. And the aim was to trace aspects of interplay between images and text, and to investigate adaptation processes in the diffusion of Buddhist narratives. The Śyāmaand Jātakas is one of the case studies we selected, and the following map provides an overview of the written and visual sources we examined. So we have versions in Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese, and we focused on depictions from Gandhara, Kucha, Turfan, Dunhuang, and Tiafundong, although we considered other sources for comparative purposes. And the second project is still ongoing, is Buddhist rebirth narratives in literary and visual cultures of Gandhara. The team, led by Jessie, is composed of text specialists and art historians, whose name you see here. And the project seeks to comprehensively assess the religious and cultural significance of literary and visual narratives of the past lives of Siddhartha Gautama during the early centuries of the Common Era in Gandhara. The inception of the project being the discovery of quite a number of Gandhari manuscripts which contain Purva Yogas and Avadanas. These are previous birth stories, and they've been discovered since the 1990s. The story of Mega, so the Dīpaā·ԥkara Jātaka, is central in this study, not least because it outnumbers by far the other previous birth stories. And with 129 representations, it's far ahead the other 16 Jātakas documented in the visual record. The next one on the list, as you can see, being the Śyāmaand Jātaka with only 11 representations. For the purpose of this conference, I will compare and contrast the trajectories of the two pre-birth stories and explore how the lives of the two ascetics have been invented and reinvented as the stories disseminated across within and across South and Central Asia. The story of Śyāmaand being very well studied, I will limit myself to briefly outlining key features of its transformation. And the review of the first case study will provide a sort of blueprint for the analysis of the second, on which I will primarily concentrate. My aim in revisiting the story of Mega against the background of a story which only has, in common their genre, a previous birth, and the occupation of the bodhisattva, that of being an ascetic, is twofold. Firstly, I wish to highlight converging and diverging dynamics in their diffusion and transformation. And secondly, and this is really the argument that runs as a subtext, I wish to draw attention to the fact that by focusing on large-scale or large-distance transformations, we sometimes overlook the complexity of local dynamics. In the case of the story of Mega, its unique position in the Gandharan art has repeatedly been noted, though never entirely satisfactorily explained. And this presentation is another foray into this intriguing situation, albeit, as you will see, a somewhat experimental one. So let me turn to the first case study, the Śyāmaand Jātaka. In the forthcoming discussion of the continuities and changes in the depiction of the Śyāmaand Jātaka, I will restrict myself to aspects that are most pertinent, illuminating to the analysis of the second case study. These concern codification processes, topical arrangement within an iconographic program, and the interplay with text. So most illustrations of the legend agree on the selection of scenes to be depicted, so the king shooting, the young Brahmin as he draws water, the king by the parents' hut. So you have examples from Gandhara, Dunhuang, and Śyāmaand. The king leading the parents to Śyāmaand's corpse, and the imminent revival of Śyāma by Saka. The paintings from, as you can see, there are expanded versions as well, and also dramatically reduced ones, such as those from Kizil, which focus on the moment of the shooting and sometimes the parents sitting in the hut. Embedded within the complex sequences of Jātakas and Avadanas, painting in the rhomboidal fields on the vaulted ceiling of caves, they function on a more elusive register. These evoking the rationalization of the Buddha's career and his soteriological scheme, or the vision of former lives resulting from meditation, depending on the interpretation of the broader iconographic program of the caves that one favors. Similarities can also be noted in the motifs employed to depict the scene of Śyāma kneeling down to fetch water, the king leading the parents to the corpse, and the revival scene. And the relative cohesion within the Gandharan corpus, the 11 Gandharan reliefs, as well as their parallels with the art of Dunhuang, Śyāmaand, as well as Kizil, had the following phenomena. On the one hand, the formation of a relatively stable iconographic conventions taking place in Gandhara, and secondly, the diffusion of a more or less codified iconography across Central Asia. The connection between this group of images becomes more apparent when compared with the distinct representations at Sanchi and Ajanta. At both places, Śyāma is not portrayed kneeling down, but standing with a pitcher, holding a pitcher. And the episode of the king breaking the news to the parents in Ajanta is not portrayed at Sanchi, and at Ajanta, cave 17, this is highlighted in green, it gives a radically different rendering. The king carries the wounded boy on his shoulder, and this motif has been discussed at length by Schlingroth and Brockington. So broadly, the depictions differ in several respects. Some transformations, so the items of clothing, the type of architecture are immediately perceptible, and mirror changes in aesthetics and the adaptation to a new cultural milieu. Others can be made sense of in light of its relationship to literary accounts. And this can be illustrated by one example. The importance of the story in the caves of Dunhuang. It's actually the Jātaka which is the most frequently represented in Dunhuang. At case 100, the case that you have listed here, 299, 301, 302, 124. And also it can be illustrated through the somewhat expanded representation of tokens of Śyāma's filial piety, with Śyāma picking up those fruits, walking across the mountain, kneeling down to his parents, fetching different types of food. The visual expansion of the theme of Śyāma's piety at Dunhuang and Śyāmaand echoes similar choices in a group of texts, the Shanzi Ting and the Liu Du Di Ting, both verbose on Śyāma's services to his parents. Although it is likely that both texts were circulating at the time when the paintings were made, during the Northern Zhou and the Sui dynasties, a direct connection between these texts and the paintings would be hard to establish. That being said, the common emphasis on the narrative motif of filial piety is probably not accidental, but needs to be analyzed in the context of Buddho-Confucian relationship and dispute, a topic fulsomely discussed in scholarship. In his recent overview of Buddhist sources and scholarship on Buddhist and Confucian conceptions of filial piety, Asanga Guantin outlines 6 strategies developed by Buddhists to counteract allegations of their being unfilial. Among these is the popularization of stories and parables such as the Śyāmaand Jātaka and the Ulambana Sutra. As evidence, he mentions the many versions of the Śyāmaand Jātaka, extant as translation or Chinese composition, as well as the many reference allusions to the story in sutras. One may also add the popularity of the story in the caves of Dunhuang, and now the visual expansion of the theme of Śyāmaand's piety takes on a new meaning in this context. So how can this schematic overview of the trajectory of the Śyāmaand Jātaka, thought in the very simple terms of expansion, reduction, transposition into new topical arrangements, help in our study of the Dīpaā೯ƒkara Jātaka? The Dīpaā೯ƒkara legend, illustrated here with a relief from Sikri in Gandhara, narrates the previous life of the Buddha as a Brahmin student who's named Mega, Sumedha, or Sumedhi, depending on sources. Upon hearing the visit of Dīpaā೯ƒkara, he obtains lotuses from a young woman to offer to the Buddha. He throws them and the lotus remains suspended in the air. A mitre prevents Mega from approaching Dīpaā೯ƒkara, so the former throws his garment on the ground, spreads his hair for the latter to walk on. Dīpaā೯ƒkara prophesies that Mega will become a Buddha in a future life, that is the Vyakarana. And in some accounts, the Mahavastu and the Divyavadana, this is preceded by Mega's explicit vow to achieve enlightenment. This is the Pranidhi. This is a significant story as it marks the inception of Bodhisattvahood. It is preserved in about 25 versions listed here, according to the study by Junko Matsumura. With this in mind, it is a little disappointing that no version in Gandhari exists in the corpus of some 50 previous birth stories documented so far. It would account, at least partially, for the popularity of the story in Gandhara. And although I'm primarily concerned with discrepancies within the Gandharan literary and visual corpora, a digression about the occurrence of the story in Central Asia will not be inappropriate. The story of Mega is not as frequently represented as the Śyāmaand Jātaka, depicted in the context of a study on Pranidhi images on the Northern Silk Road. She documents a dozen of illustrations, so we have 4 minimalist illustrations of the story on the vaulted ceilings of 4 central pillared caves at Kizil, where they appear alongside the Śyāmaand Jātaka, as well as 3 large-scale depictions, more large-scale depictions paintings depicted at Kizil, Kumtumra, and Bezeklik. As she and others have observed, the motifs of Mega standing about to throw the lotuses and kneeling at the feet of Dīpaā·ƒkara, depicted at least on large-scale paintings, draws upon Gandharan models. The minimalist depiction of Kizil differ in that the protagonists are depicted seated. Similarly to the Śyāmaand Jātaka, this group of images distinguishes itself from representations of the story in South and Southeast Asia. And I apologize for, as I do not have images of that. In these contexts, the episode of the lotus is omitted. As Matsumura demonstrates, this major regional, northern-southern distinction is also reflected in literary accounts. In their comparison with Gandharan material, scholars have also often noted the shift from narrative depiction to an iconographic type of scene, focusing on the Pranidhi. This is at least suggested by the broader iconographic context in which the large-scale depictions of the legend appear at Kizil and Bezeklik, namely of the Pranidhis. So you have an example here, case it should be 163 cave 69, sorry, at Kizil, and basically cave 9. However correct this observation is, it must be said that the mode of portrayal of the story in Gandhara is very diverse. In fact, the processes of reduction, expansion, integration within a new thematic sequence outlined for the Śyāmaand Jātaka across Central Asia can be observed for the Dīpaā೯ƒkara legend within Gandhara. In what follows, I will briefly review the various modes of representation and underline, as I proceed, how this distinguishes the Dīpaā೯ƒkara legend from other Jātakas. Firstly, the story of Mega is carved on a diversity of material supports. The episode is illustrated on independent reliefs at the bottom, on frieze reliefs with separated scenes just above, and on the top right, on false gables. And as this scheme demonstrates here, they were fixed to the base and the dome of the stupa. The story is also carved on stelae, all of which coming from the region of Kapisa. As for other Jātakas, more often than not, they are carved on frieze reliefs without divider, so this continuous narration on a frieze which is quite narrow. This type of relief is often referred to as stair rises on account of the flight of 18 steps excavated by Crompton at Jamalgari in the 19th century. And these connected the Vihara courtyard with the stupa courtyard. As these two examples illustrate, the mode of visual narration further sets the Dīpaā೯ƒkara story aside from other previous birth stories. It is represented according to the mode referred to by Deheja as conflated narrative, by which multiple episodes of the story, so 1, 2, 3, 4, are represented, whereas the main protagonist is only depicted once. Other previous birth stories, for instance here, the Śyāmaand Jātaka from Jamalgari, are usually depicted according to the synoptic mode of narration, whereby the multiple episodes of the story are depicted within a single frame, but their temporal sequence is not quite clear. Finally, in some 35 cases, the encounter of Mega and Dīpaā೯ƒkara is associated to other events on the same support. And you have a list of the topics here, and I will come back to these in detail in a moment. This is never the case for other Jātakas documented so far. So what this overview shows, beside the unique place of the story in the Gandharan record, is that while it is true that the Gandharan representations appear predominantly narrative in comparison to their Central Asian counterparts, they are not merely so. And what this evidence also suggests is that the semantic range of the depictions varied widely, and that these were conditioned by the placement of the story on specific supports, as well as their association with either biographical events. Though a conclusive statement on the intended meaning of each of these patterns is difficult to arrive at, it might not be impossible, some might not be impossible to interpret. And in the time which remains, I will examine the following stelae, false gables, and reliefs with separated scenes. Now, I will not elaborate on the first two, as these have been dealt with to some extent by Junior Rhee and Maurizio Taddei, respectively. And I will give more attention to the last group. The stelae from Gandhara, from Kapisa, constitute a distinct group. The narrative elements, which are depicted at the feet of Dīpaā೯ƒkara and on each side of his head, they hold a subsidiary role, and Dīpaā೯ԥkara, the Buddha of the past, a prominent one. The finds from Chotorak provide an indication as to their location and possibly their function. Jacques Meunier, who excavated the site in 1942, reports having found this stele in niche D4, which faces the stupa at the south of the Buddhist compound. in view of the iconographic rendering of the story, rendering of the story and the significant place held by the stele in the monastery, the hypothesis that the stele were conceived as commemorative illustrations of the event which, as reported by Faxian and Xuanzang, was localized in ancient Nagara, so Kapisa, is alluring. As reposited, this would also explain the popularity of the story in Gandhara. True enough, but it is also the case of the Śyāmaand Jātaka, and in fact quite a lot of other previous birth stories and life events that are reported by the Chinese pilgrims, which are listed here, and highlighted in green are those which do find an echo in the visual record, although, as I have indicated, we do not have that many representations. One must also acknowledge that the great miracle of Shravasti, an event which has no connection with the region whatsoever, is also depicted on stele in Kapisa. On gables, the Dīpaā喚kara, on false gables, the Dīpaā喚kara Jātaka is superposed with the following scenes or depictions: bodhisattvas, the bodhisattva Maitreya and Tushita, bodhisattva and devotees, the offering of dust by the young boy who the Buddha predicts will be Ashoka in a future life, the offering of honey by a monkey, the offering of Sujata, the first sermon, and several preaching scenes. The logics of some of these associations have been discussed by Maurizio Taddei, who proposes the promise of Buddhahood, the story of lineages, particularly dynastic ones, and the transmission of the Buddhist Dharma across different eras as a unifying theme. Although he misinterpreted the gift of dust by Ashoka for the meeting of Siddhartha with his son, he acknowledges himself in his article that even if we take this other interpretation, it still fits into his model. Now we'll move to the third group of objects, which I will spend more time. In this case, the logic of some of these associations remain to be explained on frieze reliefs with separated scenes. The Dīpaā喚kara Jātaka is superposed with the following: Buddha and devotees, the realm of Maya Devi, the Bodhisattva Shakyamuni in Tushita, and the Bodhisattva Maitreya in Tushita. In these examples, the juxtaposition of the scenes follows a chronological logic. None of the scenes illustrate his previous birth. All the episodes which succeed the Dīpaā喚kara Jātaka belong to the last existence of the Bodhisattva Shakyamuni, whose high deeds would unfold as the devotee makes the circumambulatory path around the stupa. The life cycle eventually concludes with the hopeful sojourn of the next Buddha to come, Maitreya, in Tushita, and this is what you have depicted on this relief here. At this point, I would like to evoke a hypothesis we have been using within the frame of the previous birth project. A little while ago, it was during a panel at the EAS, Tim Land suggested that the Dīpaā喚kara Jātaka is an abbreviation of the entire circle of all previous birth stories known in Gandhara. This was based on an idea presented in texts such as the Buddha Vamsa and the Charya Pitaka that the Dīpaā喚kara Jātaka marks the very beginning of the Bodhisattva's career. On this occasion, I showed how the visual corpus further supported, complemented, but also possibly undermined the idea that the Dīpaā喚kara Jātaka abbreviates the subsequent Jātaka cycle. If one presupposes that the story begins the Bodhisattva's career, the former remarks on the narrative sequence are indicative of an ellipsis in time, i.e. of Jātakas, in the chronological succession of events. And on the example which you have here, you have the Dīpaā喚kara Jātaka followed by Maya Devi's dream. I also offered to read stairways such as those excavated at Jamalgari, but also at other places, Chakiligondi, Azizdeiri, as an allusion to the stream of previous birth. With their concentration on a selection of previous birth stories, the stairways would conjure the Bodhisattva's path to Buddhahood in a manner not unlike what we have observed in the caves of Kizil. Several difficulties nevertheless prevent from accepting this reconstruction without condition. The diversity of media supports and the range of scenes with which the Dīpaā喚kara story is associated, and which I have previously discussed, indicate that while this model may find resonance at a given site, it cannot be satisfactorily applied across the whole region. In response to our panel, Richard Salomon mentioned that the corpus of Gandhari manuscript contained a birch bark manuscript of the Buddha Bahudaka Sutra, dated through carbon 14 to the 1st century BC, the 1st century CE. These texts give an account of this is a Gandhari manuscript. These texts give an account of the lives of the Buddhas of the past from Dīpaā೯ƒkara to Kashyapa, mentioning around 15 Buddhas of the past, and of the Bodhisattva's relationship to them. The texts are framed in a dialogue between Ananda and the Buddha, Shakyamuni, who tells the former how, in a previous life, he has served numerous Buddhas, starting with Dīpaā·ƒkara. These texts relate more directly to the Gandharan context than texts such as the Buddhavamsa and the Charya Pitaka. In the meantime, this group of texts has been discussed by Vincent Tournier in the context of his study of the formation of the Mahavastu, within which the Bahubudaka Sutra exists in several versions, in 3 versions. The analysis of their equivalence in other textual corpora indicates that the sutras are not Nikaya-specific, but spread among several schools which have a common point, that of being all implanted in the northwest, so in the region of Gandhara. The texts bear witness to bodological speculation on the Bodhisattva's career and articulate notions fundamental for the idea of the Bodhisattva, Pradinada and the Vyakarana, as well as various systems of steps structuring the Bodhisattva's path. Vincent Tournier also shows how the Mahavastu integrates numerous materials related to the Bodhisattva's career, such as the Dasha Bhumika. By studying the texts which have been woven into the Mahavastu textual thread, the author documents a soteriological shift from the promotion of arhatship to that of Buddhahood. Rather than developing a new hypothesis, this study compels to approach the problem of the Dīpaā·ƒkara story from an alternative angle. This excursus in textual tradition allows to grasp the range of religious concerns that were active in Gandhara at the time when the reliefs were produced. It also accounts for the popularity of the Dīpaā·ԥkara legend in the region, particularly when one bears in mind that it was circulating across several Nikayas. And to some extent, these texts also account for its unique position within the corpus of previous birth stories and the limited presence of the letter in the visual record. What they deal with is the system of steps structuring the Bodhisattva's career, starting with the pranidhi, rather than with the conditions within which these steps were fulfilled and completed, namely the previous birth stories themselves, the Jātakas. Ultimately, taken together, textual and visual material bear witness to a bold claim Gandharan Buddhists are making, namely that the Bodhisattva career of Buddha Shakyamuni begins in their own land. I would like to conclude by posing a question. Is the Dīpaā·ԥkara story a Mahayana story? In other words, can we uncover intra-religious dynamics in the same manner that the excursus in the textual tradition connected to the Śyāmaand Jātaka revealed its function in an inter-religious Buddho-Confucian dialogue? Needless to say, one cannot be too cautious when answering this question, not least because it entails using a label that has been deconstructed for several decades by scholarship, and which is probably anachronistic, largely at least, for the Gandharan context. As Tournier underlines in his study, the bodological reflection articulated in the Mahavastu does not make it a Mahayana text. There is no elaboration on Shunyata, none of the great bodhisattvas are mentioned, the celestial Buddhas such as Amitabha and Akshobhya are equally absent. Rather, and I quote, it allows to measure the impact of the rising Bodhisattvayana on Lokodaravadin milieu around the 4th and 5th century, end of quote. Having stated that much, I would like to present a piece of evidence. Mind you, evidence is probably a strong word considering the fragmentary nature of this piece. So this is a fragment depicting a stupa, and on the right, the Dīpaā೯ƒkara Jātaka. You see Mega throwing the lotuses and kneeling down. This fragment belongs to one of the intricate stelae which we saw yesterday. I mean, one of these examples we saw yesterday. And in fact, I'm quite tempted to identify here again the Dīpaā೯ƒkara Jātaka, although this is very, very fragmentary. These panels were produced at specific places in Gandhara, so Saribalol, Taktibahi, Mohammed Nari, and Lorian Tangai. So they are very limited productions. And they are commonly interpreted as depictions of Buddhist paradise, probably that of Amitabha, according to the most recent study by Paul Harrison and Christian Lutsanitz. The genius this evidence is, it suggests that, embedded within the visual language of the stele, the story came to participate in a dialectic of the Bodhisattvayana. Thank you for your attention.